This is Mrs. O'Neill for Chapter 7, Section 1, Part 3, your practice problems. So pause the video, make sure you have your real periodic table out, as well as that periodic table that's in the back of your packet that has those valence electrons and the charges. So hopefully you have everything ready to rock and roll, as well as your packet of those practice problems. Let me remind you of these endings. So you might want to pause and re-say them or kind of look them over as to how those endings are for your anions. All right, hopefully you got that all pat. We want to remind you as well that the charge, anytime I'm asking for a charge or anytime you see a charge, you should see a positive, negative with a number, or you could also see it the other way. You could see the number and then that positive, negative. So when you do see a positive that does not have a number, it is an indication of +1, let's say, or a -1. So the 1 is sometimes understood, but for our purposes, I really try to write the +1 or the 1 plus just to make sure you're understanding that it is a charge. However, in some textbooks, you look at it the other way, or they write it the other way. They do like 1 negative or 1 positive. It really doesn't matter. And most professors will let you get away with just the plus or the negative, and that's fine as well. I just like you to make sure you're aware that it's not just a positive ion, but it's a +1 charged ion. And the more you do this, the easier it's going to be for Chapter 9 when we get into actually writing compound formulas. So that 1 is going to be very helpful to you. So you should already have this on your periodic table. And again, notice for charges, I'm writing the +1, and for the anion of the 1 is -1. So again, the more you're used to that and the more you see it, it's going to be a lot easier for you to deal with Chapter 9 when we get into writing and naming compounds. You also want to remember that those metals are going to stay the same. So those metals that turn into cations are going to have the same name as the atom it comes from. However, those non-metals are going to change its atom name to an IDE ending. So we want to remember that. All right, so practice problems. It is up to you at this point. You can pause the video and try to do as many as you can. You can pause the video and do 1 or 2 and then check your work. You can do 1 or 2 as an example with me and then check the work, and then you pause and then finish the practice problems. You have to decide how you're going to do these practice problems. And I believe there's 5 questions. So maybe you can do number 1 on your own, not a big deal, but number 2 you're not so sure of. So then maybe you want to do or see one of the answers first and then pause to do the others. Okay, so like I said, most of these have a multi-part, like an ABC with it. So number 1, do these atoms lose or gain electrons to become these ions? And when they lose or gain, how many of those electrons are they losing or gaining? All right, so let's focus on that positive first. That positive charge is going to tell us that it lost electrons. The 1 is going to tell us how many. So if you want to pause and try to do B and C, or just keep playing to see the answers. So boron is now going to have a positive charge in the cation. So it lost electrons. How many? 3. And those 3 electrons are going to be lost. So notice how I'm showing you that it could be plus and then the number, or the number and then the plus sign. So either way is okay. And notice I'm always writing the 1, even with this guy. So the iodine has become iodide when it has a -1 charge. Okay, so that negative tells us that it gained electrons, and how many is that number of 1. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. So again, number 2, A and B, if you want to pause and try it yourself, or listen to A and then pause and do B. So again, I'm taking my time to explain these because the more you understand now, the easier Chapter 9, when we write and name compound formulas, is going to be a lot easier. All right, so we need to write the name and the symbol with the charge of the ion formed. All right, so aluminum is actually going to stay aluminum, and because it lost 3 electrons, it now has a +3 charge. So now sulfur, if you find sulfur in the periodic table, it's going to be a nonmetal. So that sulfur changes to sulfide, and because it gained 2 electrons, it's going to have a -2. Okay, so notice we're using that periodic table to help us find that charge, but we could also get that charge from telling you how many electrons it's lost or gained. All right, number 3. So we're naming these ions, whether they're cations or anions, we're naming them, and then telling again how many electrons was lost or gained. So for A, Ba barium, since it's a positive cation, stays barium, and because of that +2, it lost 2 electrons. All right, B, arsenic now changes to arsenide because it's negative, and that is going to, -3 means that it gained 3 electrons. So again, this one's a little trickier to know what the ending you take away and what the new ending is, but arsenate, no, not arsenate, I'm sorry, arsenide changes, no, arsenic, sorry, arsenic changes to arsenide. I'm thinking actually of the polyatomic ion that we're going to learn about in the future. All right, here we go to letter C. O was first oxygen because it's a -2 and it's a nonmetal. It changes to oxide and it gained 2 electrons. So again, hopefully at this point you understand this. If you didn't, you could also pause, go back and retry them, re-understand them. All right, number 4 at this point you should be able to do. So definitely pause and give A, B, and C a try. So for A, nitrogen gained, it's a non-metal. That means nitrogen changes to nitride and now has a -3 charge or 3 negative. It doesn't matter which way you write that charge, as long as I see some kind of positive negative symbol and the number 1, 2, or 3 at this point. All right, so B, calcium loses. It's a metal, so calcium stays metal and becomes a +2 charge or 2 positive. And C, fluorine changes to fluoride because it's a non-metal. And since it gained 1 electron, it's going to have a -1 charge. All right, 5, can you do this? Can you find these elements on the periodic table? Can you figure out its charge because of its location? And can you come up with a name? All right, so hopefully you came up with a +1 for potassium. You came up with -3 or 3 negative for phosphide. That one changes its name. And magnesium has a +2 or 2+, and it stays magnesium because it's a metal. All right, hopefully you understand that. Here's that quickie quiz, but I've added a couple of questions along the way. So what I would do is I would pause when you see the question, see if you can come up with the right A, B, C, or D answer. But then I have 2 other questions. And again, you might want to pause and make sure you can get the correct answer. So number 1. Hopefully you paused and looked up oxygen on the periodic table to find that it has 6 valence electrons. All right, so what then the charge would be of oxygen? Pause. Hopefully you came up with -2, whether you know how many valence electrons or you know its location and the periodic trend. All right, another question. What then would the name of that ion be? Hopefully you came up with oxide. Good job. All right, number 2. Hopefully you paused and came up with metals. Metals lose electrons to gain stability, and nonmetals gain electrons to gain stability. Number 3, hopefully you came up with this, looking at that periodic table of yours, right? Magnesium's in group 2. That means it's going to have to lose 2 electrons. It's 2 valence electrons. So what would the charge be? Hopefully you thought of +2. All right, now how about that name? Hopefully you came up with, well, magnesium's a metal, so it's going to stay that metal name, magnesium. All right, last one, I believe. Hopefully, since it's an anion, you either chose B or D. Looking at your periodic table, hopefully you chose D because it has a charge of -1, right? That -1 tells us that it gained 1 electron. All right, what about the name? Since it's an anion, it's a non-metal, we're going to change its bromine name to a bromide ion name. All right, hopefully this makes sense. This might be a video or practice problems that you want to rewatch, or even 7.1 part 7.1.2, right? The part 2 that you just watched before, just to get a better understanding of valence electrons, charges, and how to name these ions. All right, we will see you in class for some bookwork.